Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So, Theresa May arrived in the United States yesterday for her meeting with Donald Trump, which is later today. She kicked off her visit with a speech to Republican politicians in Philadelphia, during which she asserted the need for a strong NATO alliance, urged President Trump to engage but beware of Russia, and reiterated the UK's opposition to the use of torture in intelligence gathering. But Theresa May made headlines with a section of a speech in which she signalled what looks like a pretty important change of the British approach towards military intervention.
It is in our interests, those of Britain and America together, to stand strong together to defend our values, our interests, and the very ideas in which we believe. This cannot mean a return to the failed policies of the past. The days of Britain and America intervening in sovereign countries in an attempt to remake the world in our own image are over. But nor can we afford to stand idly by when the threat is real and when it is in our own interests to intervene. We must be strong, smart, and hard-headed, and we must demonstrate the resolve necessary to stand up for our interests.
Mrs. May in Philadelphia yesterday. I think both of you have been pretty critical of what you might call the Blairite interventionist policy. Mr. Cameron, having indicated he didn't want to go that road, did do so in Libya. You must be quite pleased by what you've heard there.
Pleased? No. I mean, I think, there's a wider picture here, which isn't necessarily what she says or doesn't say about military intervention, given that whatever she says is with a mind to placating Donald Trump. It's the fact that she is getting engaged with the US president in this way, a US president who at best can be described as a lying authoritarian right-wing populist who has no respect for the current institutions and mechanisms in a global sense that maintain stability or security in any meaningful way. So to ally herself in any way with a US foreign policy, given the direction it's likely to take, I think is dangerous and not good for Britain.
Is Mrs. May only saying this to placate Donald Trump? You don't think she would be saying it anyway?
No, I don't think she's saying it to placate Donald Trump at all. But on the other hand, it's not as good as it looks. The large chunk of the speech mentions the fact that we're sending 800 troops to the Baltic republics and to Poland, which is actually a mad thing for Britain to be doing. And our policy towards Russia has become almost as insane as our former policies towards Iraq.
But she's drawn a distinction
it's
between
different kind of lunacy.
She's drawn a distinction between foreign wars of intervention and supporting NATO.
Well,
and that's what the Baltic deployment
I'm not
is.
quite sure what this distinction is. This supposed Russian aggression we're also frightened about, which involves a voluntary departure by the old Soviet Union from hundreds of thousands of square miles of territory, and its reduction to a country of military and economic insignificance, so that it's now got a smaller GDP than Italy, and we still go on about it as if it was a terrifying superpower about to seize the continent, and act accordingly by building up the very fears in Eastern Europe, and particularly the Baltics, which we then claim through NATO to be soothing. It's a very, very odd posture. And one of the very few sensible things which Donald Trump has said about foreign policy is that he thinks that NATO is obsolete. It is obsolete. It's as obsolete as mounting an alliance against the Austro-Hungarian Empire or Napoleon Bonaparte. NATO was an alliance against the Soviet Union. It's gone.
The Foreign Secretary has also said that we need to think afresh how we handle Syria. He's even hinted that if he wants, Mr. Assad could be allowed to run for elections. That's just recognising, I would suggest, that Mr. Assad is safe as long as the Russians are backing him, and that we really have no influence there.
I mean, I think there's a danger. I mean, when we look at what's happened over the last few months in terms of, what the Foreign Secretary has said, and, to be clear, it all started with Nigel Farage being the first to meet Theresa May, and it's set this tone by which we're going to try and normalise a president who is not normal, and his intentions for the world are not normal. They're not things that we necessarily
But I
want
asked
to be
you about
allied
Syria
with. About
and the
Syria,
British
that
position.
might be a reflection of realities on the ground. But you look at something like Trump's statements regarding Israel, which, Theresa May displeased many in favour of a peaceful solution in that region, including most of Europe, by allying Britain to the new US president in a way that was a change of tack for the UK and the wrong change.
I would suggest the Foreign Secretary's statement is simply a recognition that Syria is now a Russian sphere of influence.
Oh, it's an extraordinary pullback from the previous position of this country, which had been to pretty much to declare itself for the overthrow of Assad. And I think it's a recognition that that policy has been defeated. There is still talk, I think, of safe zones being set up in Syria this morning, which I think some people see as a dangerous return to an attempt to intervene by the
That's for
United States.
refugees, is that right?
Well, supposedly, yes, but it could develop into more calls for no-fly zones, and we all know that the military complications that would lead to. So I don't think it's entirely and totally over yet. But certainly it does seem to me to be that one of the most dangerous policies which we have adopted over the past several years has come to an end, and the absolute refusal to even begin to see the possibility that the Assad government might survive has been rather quietly, but
stitched.
But well, yes.
Okay,
but
I'm going to stop you there because
yeah.
we've got a lot to cover. And we will return to some of these themes as we do. It's time, though, for our daily quiz. Theresa May is the first foreign leader to meet Donald Trump, but which leader has been the first to cancel a meeting with the American president? Is it A, President Hollande of France, B, President Raul Castro of Cuba, C, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon of Scotland, or D, President Enrique Pena Nieto of Mexico? At the end of the show, our guest will give us the correct answer, on pain of death. Later today, the Prime Minister will meet President Trump for face-to-face talks as the first foreign leader, as we said, to visit the White House since he became president. The PM's trip comes at the end of a frenetic first week for Donald Trump, who's been busy putting pen to paper, ruling by executive decree. Among the dozens of executive orders he's signed so far, he's instructed officials to begin planning the border wall he promised to build with Mexico, to scale back Barack Obama's Affordable Care Act, maybe as a precursor to getting rid of it altogether. So what are Mrs. May and Mr. Trump likely to discuss this afternoon British time? Well, a possible US-UK trade deal is likely to be Mrs. May's top priority. Well, the UK can't begin to negotiate new trade deals, or at least to finalise such deals until it leaves the EU. Mr. Trump has said that he wants a quick deal after that. Mrs. May is also likely to remind the new president of the strategic importance of NATO, as she sees it, an alliance he has called obsolete. The Prime Minister may also want to discuss how the US and the UK deal with what they see as a resurgent Russia. Mr. Trump has been full of praise for Russia's President Putin and says it's an asset, not a liability, if he has a relationship with him, a stance that has alarmed some of America's allies on this side of the Atlantic. Mrs. May is also under pressure to reject Mr. Trump's comments on waterboarding. She has already suggested that the UK could scale back on intelligence sharing if the US reintroduces torture. She's also said that she won't be afraid to challenge the president, who continues to court controversy. As she told the BBC, whenever there is something that I find unacceptable, I won't be afraid to say that to Mr. Trump. We're joined now from Strasbourg by the Conservative MP Nigel Evans. He attended Donald Trump's inauguration last week, and in the studio, the joint leader of the Green Party, Jonathan Bartley. Welcome to you both. Nigel Evans, let me come to you first. You've met Mr. Trump. You were in Washington before Mrs. May. What is his attitude to Britain?
Well, I think we've got a great opportunity to rekindle the special relationship which Theresa spoke about to the Republican congressional retreat in Philadelphia. I mean, I think she mentioned special relationship about 8 times. And the warm welcome she had by those congressmen and senators was absolutely superb. I spoke to a lot of congressmen and senators during the 4 days I was in Washington during the inauguration. And whenever I mentioned Brexit, they were lapping it up. And as far as a trade deal was concerned, it didn't matter whether they were Republican or Democrat. The thumbs were going up. They were really keen to get a speedy trade deal done between the United Kingdom and the United States of America. So we've got in President Trump a man whose mum was Scottish, who's got a couple of businesses in Scotland, in golf courses. He was in favour of Brexit. He wants to do a trade deal with the United Kingdom as quickly as possible. He put the bust of Winston Churchill back in the Oval Office as one of his first acts. What is there that now we need to do, which is engaging with Donald Trump as much as we possibly can? And of course, Theresa is the first world leader to meet Donald Trump since becoming president.
Indeed, I think we've said that about 4 times now, so it must be true.
Could that be because there isn't an actual jostling queue of
these? No, it's not,
No
because
rush.
Angela Merkel has asked to see him and he hasn't even replied to her. So let's just.
Well, that's not even. There's still not a jostling queue.
Well, yeah, but
But the fact that he wants to
hold
meet
on,
her
hold on,
isn't-
don't get sidetracked on
Okay.
this. Stick with this. We're leaving the EU, which many people feel kind of leaves us a little bit friendless. There's a powerful man in the Oval Office who wants to be our best friend. Why wouldn't we take him up on that?
Because it puts us in a very weak position. Leaving the EU, we are the junior partner, we are looking quite desperate. I think Theresa May looks quite desperate going over there, falling over herself to
You don't
be the
think she
first
should
in
have
the
gone?
queue. I think she should have bided her time and she should have gone with some very clear red lines, particularly around torture and, most importantly, around the Paris
Well, she's
climate
issued
deal.
a red line on torture already.
With around the Paris climate deal, you know, there's going to be much in the
Hold
way
on,
of...
we were on torture. She's
Yeah.
issued a red line on torture.
Well, I mean,
She's in favour of the Paris climate deal. Britain's not going to unsign that.
but is she going to Trump and saying, this is a red line for us and we need you to show leadership? She needs to show leadership.
He's against it. Rightly or wrongly, he's against it. The British government can't change his mind on that.
Oh, so suddenly we haven't got any influence. You know, either we're going to show leadership in the world or we're not. Look at someone like Mexico. They're showing us up at the moment. They're being very, very strong and they're playing hardball. What we've got is a situation where we put ourselves in an extreme Brexit context where we have to go cap in hand to America, say, what can you give us in terms of a trade deal? Of course, Donald Trump is welcoming her with open arms. He knows he's got all the cards in his hand. He knows he can ride roughshod over her and he sees a very desperate Prime Minister come to say, you know, what can you give us, please?
Okay, Nigel Evans, Donald Trump is, how shall I put it, at the best unpredictable, uncertain, possibly even unreliable. Is it wise for a British Prime Minister to put all her eggs in this basket?
She's not putting all her eggs in just one
Well, quite a
basket.
few.
We are going to, as she said to the congressman, be outward looking. But a trade deal with the United States of America is going to be massive leverage when we start to talk to the European Union about doing a trade deal as well. Once we've done one with the United States of America, are our neighbours in Europe actually going to say, no, we want to punish you? Because that's, you know, roughly the voices that we're hearing from some within the Commission at this moment in time. And yes, some, listen, Donald Trump is a different sort of president. We know that. And he says things in a different sort of way. And the fact is, you know, on the things like building the wall between Mexico and the United States of America, and the fact is that he's started the progress on that straight away. I think Donald Trump is likely to be the first politician in history to be roundly criticised for keeping his promises. I mean, you know, he said that that was what he was going to do. He got elected by over 63 million people. So we have to recognise he's the president of the United States.
On the issue of
to be able to influence him.
Well, influence is what I wanted to come on to. One of the tests for Mrs. May's influence will be whether, from her point of view, and from Europe's point of view, particularly from the Germans, can she bring him round to her way of thinking on NATO or not?
Well, that's one thing that she did clearly speak to the congressman about, which was, yes, NATO may not be as effective as it should be, and you know that's an understatement in itself. But we are going to spend our 2% on defence, and it's going to increase in every parliamentary year up to 2020. And that she is going to use her influence with other European leaders to be able to do just the same. NATO is in need of reform. She has actually she stated that to the congressman. So it's not as if we're just going to sit back and just say, well, everything's hunky-dory as far as NATO is concerned. You've already pointed that out, Andrew. There's gaping problems with NATO. But the fact that we are spending 2% of our GDP on defence, and a lot of other European countries are basically taking a free ride on the backs of the United Kingdom and the United States of America, it's just simply not going to be tolerated. They've got to wake up and realise that they've got to pay their contribution towards their own defence.
Right. Jonathan Bartley, do you care if NATO is modernised. I mean, are you in favour of NATO?
We've been very critical of NATO, and I think there's some common ground in what Peter said earlier on about NATO. You know, it is a relic of the Cold War, and
So you're
it
not
does
in
need
favour
reform.
of it. So when Donald Trump calls it obsolete, you agree with him?
Right now, I don't think, in a time where we're seeing increasing insecurity, is not the time to be making drastic decisions and snap decisions around NATO.
So let me just ask you again. When Donald Trump says, you've called it a relic, Donald Trump says it's obsolete, you agree with Donald Trump?
And some places there's going to be common ground around.
Well, let me look at another one that is common ground. Donald Trump has essentially canned the Trade-Pacific Partnership, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and TTIP, which is the North Atlantic equivalent, is dead in the water. You approve of both of that too, don't you?
I think what we're going to see potentially is TTIP on steroids coming back. We're going to be handed a trade deal which can have very little say over. We might be in a position where we're going to open up.
Stick with what I asked
NHS.
you. We'll come on to. Donald Trump is now against multilateral trade deals. Your party has campaigned against multilateral trade deals.
So we're now looking at a bilateral trade deal with the States. Now, what's that going to look like? TTIP may well be the blueprint for it. And if we go there and we haven't got much to negotiate with, are we just going to accept free access to our NHS from American companies that could compete?
Well, that will. I mean, you're quite right. That was part of the TTIP debate. So presumably that now becomes part of the debate which the British House of Commons will have to decide.
It's very hard to have a special relationship with a country that's talking about America first. Let's be under no illusions. America are going to look to try and get absolutely everything they can and squeeze everything out of the UK they possibly can.
That's what they do. The United States relationship with this country has always been one of straightforward, hard self-interest, and this fantasy that there is a special relationship between the two countries doesn't stand up to any kind of examination. The only real special relationship the United States has is with Saudi Arabia, and that is the one which is truly close. With us, they're baffled by our insistence on including this phrase in documents. They're slightly embarrassed by it, but they will do it on these occasions. Well, this is fundamentally a glorified selfie, where the British Prime Minister goes over to the White House, gets himself or herself photographed with the American president, and hopes to bask in reflected importance.
But this comes back to the issue then of the risks involved.
Exactly, and it's not a glorifying selfie, and that's the problem. I mean, I don't know what shade of immoral you need to be to look at what President Trump has done in the last week. Amongst the highlights are announcing that he wants to build a wall, announcing a partial ban on Muslims, and announcing that he wants to monitor the crimes of migrants, which, let's not fudge, that is straight out of a Nazi handbook. I don't know how.
So is the implication of all this then, because we know all this is what he stands for, is the implication of this that the British government should have nothing to do with him?
I don't know how you can look at that and talk in terms of shared values, which is what Theresa May.
Okay, but what's the answer to my question?
That is the answer to your question.
So we should have nothing to do with him?
I agree that we should bide our time and not rush to make friends with him and fawn and thereby normalise what he is saying, because we are the
first. But if he doesn't change his views,
the first leader to go, and therefore we have a responsibility.
But if he doesn't change his views,
do
we have nothing to do with him? Is that your recommendation?
No, that's not the binary option, is it? It's about whether we bide our time and we go in a dignified manner and say these are our priorities. We are very concerned that you would pull out of the Paris Agreement, potentially threatening world trade for decades to come. You know, those are the implications of climate change. You know, we're talking about trade deals that, you know, will affect 5 or 10 years, but what about the 20, 30-year picture? It's going to make us very economically worse off if we can't sort out, you know, the biggest threat facing humanity.
Let me go back to Nigel Evans. I think we've got a picture of you with Mr. Trump. If we can put it up on the screen. Yep, there he is, shaking hands. Not thumbs up this time. You didn't get that? That's when he was president-elect. British Prime Ministers, Labour and Conservative, have always placed great store, since Churchill onwards, by the special relationship. Is it not, though, the highest of high-wire acts to place such store by it when it's a Donald Trump that is in the White House?
I'll tell you what, Andrew. I'd rather Donald Trump in the White House who wants to do a deal with the United Kingdom, a trade deal. And I listened to what Jonathan Bartlett has said. My goodness me, there's a man who clearly is not interested in any trade deal whatsoever. Rather than President Barack Obama, who came and lectured the British electorate and said, you better vote to stay in the European Union, otherwise you'll be in the back of a queue for a trade deal. So now we've got a president who wanted Brexit, and we voted for it. and he now wants to do a trade deal with the United Kingdom. Theresa is no pushover, and she already said to the congressman this trade deal between the United States of America and the United Kingdom isn't going to be easy because there will be interests that both of us have. But there's a community of interest that brings the United Kingdom and the United States of America together. We've stood shoulder to shoulder over decades on those areas where we have great interests together.
All right.
We are not going to walk away like the Greens want us to do, or Peter Hitchens, or anybody else. He is the President of the United States of America. We have an opportunity to have influence with him and work with him, and that's what we should do.
All right, no, hold on. We've run out of time. I think, I've just got one. I've just said we've run out of time. And we're coming back to the special relationship, so just behave yourself instead of mumbling in the background there. One quick question for you, though. The Green website says your policy is to pull out of NATO unilaterally. Is that Green policy still?
It's a long-term aspiration we have, which is to get out of NATO and put something better in its place. But now is not the time to be messing around with international institutions where we're getting a more insecure world. Daily.
So you're not in favour of pulling out unilaterally?
Not right now.
OK, thank you for clarifying that. He's still mumbling here, but he does a lot of that. Anyway, over the years, and he's still mumbling, over the years, British Prime Ministers have enjoyed distinctive relationships with US presidents. The friendship forged between leaders have helped to shape world history and brought varying degrees of political fortune. But just how well can Theresa May get along with President Trump? And does the personal chemistry have to be right for the special relationship to blossom? Jenny Kuma reports.
Thank you for being a friend. Travel down a road and back again.
This is known as the Allies Bench. It captures the friendship between the American and British wartime leaders. It's also a popular stop on the London tourist trail.
I hope it always will stay this way.
The concept of the special relationship first came about because of these two men, President Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. The British Prime Minister first came up with the phrase in a speech after World War II. And over the 70 years since then, the relationship has seen its ups and downs.
Reagan and Thatcher were political soulmates, both supporters of private business and free markets. But things almost went pear-shaped when the US invaded Grenada, a British Commonwealth country, until the president rang up to apologise.
Hello, Margaret Thatcher.
If I were there, Margaret, I'd throw my hat in the door before I came in.
Oh, no, there's no need to do that.
Listen, we regret very much the embarrassment that's been caused you, and I'd just like to tell you what the story is from our end out here.
The Blair and Bush bromance seemed an unlikely friendship, a Labour leader with a right-wing Republican president. And at first it seemed they had little in common, apart from using the same brand of toothpaste. Yet Tony Blair ended up being dubbed as America's poodle by the press because of his strong support for President Bush and the Iraq War.
Let me thank President Bush for coming here. We're strong allies.
The Prime Minister is a man of his word. He has my admiration, and he has the admiration of the American people.
Jonathan Powell was Tony Blair's chief of staff. He saw firsthand how the Prime Minister got on with George Bush and Bill Clinton. So how much of a coup is it that Mrs May is the first leader to meet the new president?
Traditionally, the first meeting is always with the Canadian Prime Minister, but Prime Minister Trudeau seems not in a very great hurry to get to the White House, and Angela Merkel certainly seems to be biding her time. So it's true that Theresa May has won the race. The only thing is no one else is competing in it, so I don't think she can take great pleasure out of that.
What would be your top tip to Theresa May for this meeting?
I think a joint press conference could be very tricky indeed. Tony Blair got tripped up with the one with Bill Clinton on Monica Lewinsky, and of course found the first one with George W. Bush very difficult when we talked about Colgate and sharing toothpaste and all those sort of things. I think she should avoid that.
Theresa May will also want to avoid any appearance of being President Trump's golf caddy. She's criticised his remarks about women and Muslims and made it clear that she's not afraid to challenge him.
Whenever there is something that I find unacceptable, I won't be afraid to say that to Donald Trump.
The body language of the two leaders at their first meeting might give away clues to any personal chemistry. Will they ever appear as pally as David Cameron and Barack Obama, flipping burgers at this Downing Street barbecue? Or will differences of opinion on big issues like torture mark a cooling in the special relationship?
Thank you for being a friend.
And there we go on the special relationship. Just as you think it's going to go away, it always comes back, at least on this side of the Atlantic. Let's talk now to our Washington correspondent, Barbara Plett, Usher, who joins us from the White House live. Barbara, good to have you on the programme. We've got a rough idea of what Mrs. May wants to achieve. Do we have any idea what the Trump administration is hoping to get out of this?
Not really, actually. They haven't said very much about the meeting other than Mr. Trump's, statements about, yes, Britain is very special. He said yesterday, I'll be meeting Theresa May and I don't have a commerce secretary yet, so, oh dear, I'll have to deal with it. I think that's okay. So we haven't got any sort of serious sense of what they want to get out of it. I think it's fair to say, frankly, that this special relationship is more important to Britain than the United States. I think it's always been that way, but it's particularly the case now because the other strategic relationship with the European Union is in flux. So this one cannot be Mrs. May can't afford to have this one weaken. So she has to come through and make a point of saying, yes, we still have other options as world players, after Brexit. And she wants to get a strong endorsement of that from Mr. Trump, that he takes Britain seriously, and particularly he's willing to do a trade deal with Britain quickly once the Brexit negotiations are finished, And I think that will be the main point of the talks, the discussion about a possible trade deal.
And is the Trump administration serious about a trade deal? Do they want, I've heard some people in the administration say they would quite like to, they know that Britain can't sign a deal until it leaves the EU, but they'd quite like to do a sort of heads of agreement. Do they have when I look at all the other things Mr. Trump is doing and all the kind of firing on all sides at the moment, has he got the time to focus on this, which for him is not kind of imperative or immediate?
Well, does he have the ability to focus on much for any length of time, full stop, I think, is the question. I think this signal is important because remember President Obama said that Britain would go to the back of the queue if it went through with Brexit, and Mr. Trump has essentially said, no, we'll put you at the front of the queue. So he has said that. The details of negotiating another trade deal are quite fraught and will be quite lengthy because they can't sign another deal until Britain has sorted out its relationship with the EU. And although Mrs. May has said, yes, in the meantime, we can have talks about what barriers we can remove, so we're ready to go on the day. I think the American trade negotiators, who are very tough, will want to see what sort of relationship Britain has with the EU market, what sort of access Britain has to the EU market before they sign a trade deal. And that's going to take years before that's really sorted out. So it's more about sending a signal.
Okay, one all-important question for you, Barbara, before you go. Has the White House yet learned how to spell the Prime Minister's first name?
Well, I have heard that they got it wrong on the first attempt, but presumably once that is corrected, it will stay corrected throughout the day, but watch this space. Very
well. We'll leave it there. We'll know then if they can spell a name that the special relationship is alive and well. Barbara, thanks for joining us from the White House in Washington, D.C.
Within the last hour, Theresa May has arrived at the White House, the first foreign leader to meet President Trump since he took office just a week ago. Top of the agenda, securing a trade deal for Britain and renewing the special relationship between the UK and the US. Mr. Trump has previously said he's open to a fair and speedy deal with the UK, but has also warned he'll terminate agreements with 30 days' notice if he doesn't like them. The two leaders are due to give a news conference within the hour. First, here's our political editor, Laura Kuensberg, on today's visit.
5, 10, show!
The Prime Minister knows everyone is paying attention. The first foreign leader to make their way gingerly into the Trump White House. The first foreign leader to take that risk and that opportunity.
Ready, vote.
Respect. That's what good friendships need. The Prime Minister showing Britons for the Allied war dead in Arlington Cemetery this morning.
Present, oath!
To tighten the bonds between Britain and the US, both so changed by politics in just a few short months. But will America respect her, as she urges the new president not to turn his back against the world?
As you renew your nation just as we renew ours, we have the opportunity, indeed the responsibility, to renew the special relationship for this new age. We have the opportunity to lead together again.
She warned against repeating the mistakes of British and American interventions in the past. Ministers insist it doesn't mean she'd never send in the troops.
She said now that in future we will only intervene where the threat is real, a threat of terrorism to our own streets, for example, where there is a British interest at stake, or where our allies call on us for help. So there aren't going to be any more foreign adventures.
But do her suggestions weaken the force of the special relationship?
It's all about America first, which is of course the 1930s movement to separate America from the rest of the world. The last thing we want to do is encourage him to be an isolationist. What we should be doing is encouraging him to support NATO, to actually say he will defend all the countries of NATO if we're attacked. If she can achieve that in her visit, I think that would be really something worth bringing home.
The Prime Minister is offering friendship too, in the hope in part of doing a trade deal and doing one fast. How seriously, though, does the wheeling, dealing president take the prospect of a pact?
We want to deal with the ones that treat us well, and if they don't treat us well, we terminate, or we give them a 30-day notice of termination, and then they come back and they want to renegotiate during that 30 days, and we get a better deal.
This visit to the Trump White House is about much more than trade or any one issue. It's about how the Prime Minister and the President can work together as individuals, as politicians, and how Theresa May can handle the most unorthodox president in decades.
Can you come back? We'll see one picture tomorrow.
These first conversations, these first historic moments.
This is the original in many ways. In many ways. And it's a great honor to have Winston Churchill back.
A relationship that matters not just to her success, but to us all. Laura Kunzberg, BBC News, Washington.
Well, as we heard there, one of the main reasons for the Prime Minister's visit to the White House is trade, sounding out President Trump on the possibility of a deal to help soften the impact of leaving the European single market. So what's at stake? Here's our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed.
It is Britain's largest export market outside the EU. We send America everything, from whiskey to aircraft engines, pharmaceuticals to banking services. And unlike our trading relationships with other countries, we sell more to the US than they sell to us, creating an economically positive trade surplus. So, let's look at some of the numbers. In 2015, Britain exported goods and services worth £100 billion to the US. That's 20% of Britain's total exports. Now, that's a substantial figure, but still under half the goods and services we sold to the European Union. They are valued at £222 billion, and that's over 40% of our total exports. America might be smaller, but it is still vital, and many companies are relishing the prospect of doing more business across the Atlantic. Lance Foreman's family have been running this smoked salmon business in East London for more than a century and trading with America for 50 years.
Good stuff.
Demand from the US is increasing, and a new trade deal could boost sales.
If we don't have to pay the 5% tariff on importing our smoked salmon to the USA, that will clearly make us more competitive. And secondly, there's some regulations. We can't produce the smoked salmon in exactly the same way when we export to the USA as we do when we sell it here in the UK. So if we can just harmonise all of that, again, it'll make the product more efficient, it'll make it a better product, I think, for American consumers.
Despite the political will for a deal, there are significant hurdles. The EU says Britain cannot negotiate new trade deals until it has officially completed Brexit, which could take at least 2 years. There are likely to be clashes with America over issues like safety regulations for cars and food. America is a much bigger economy. Could UK industries like farming be overwhelmed by new, cheap imports?
Trump is looking to improve the lot of American workers, increase American jobs and wages. So the increase in American exports is the only thing he's interested in. He won't be interested in increases in British exports, and the Brits will have to work very hard to get those improvements.
especially if they want to do the agreement very quickly.
It's going to be only America first. America first.
The new man in the White House has made it clear. He wants to rip up the present trade rulebook, create his own set of rules, and then play by them. Both sides agree they want a deal, but Theresa May could well be in for a bumpy free trade ride. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
Well, let's go now to the White House and our North America editor, John Sopel. John, how important is this meeting for Mrs May and Mr Trump?
I think it's very important for both of them, and all the journalists have gathered over in the East Wing of the White House waiting for this news conference to start, where we'll hear a bit more of the discussions that they've had. It's important for Theresa May on a micro and a macro level. Yes, we've just heard from Kamal the importance of getting a trade deal that is favourable to Britain. If Britain is going to be a kind of sovereign nation, trading in the world again, a deal with America is absolutely vital. So to get off to a good start and have a good relationship with Donald Trump, who is a deal maker by nature, then that is a hugely important thing to build up a good rapport with him. But on a wider level, it's also important because I think one can't exaggerate the extent to which, as the first foreign leader to meet the new president of America, who's got very little experience in foreign affairs, this is a chance maybe to affect his thinking, the way he sees the world globally. And in her speech yesterday, she set out various issues where there were differences on Russia, on the Iran nuclear deal, on free trade, on NATO. If she can have an influence on some of his thinking and leaves Washington having done that, she will think that is a job well done. And Donald Trump also in this new order wants to show that you can do bilateral trade deals. It's not about the big kind of TPP style thing or the NAFTA style trade deals that he doesn't like. He wants to do one-off deals. A good relationship with Britain will help him achieve that.
John Sopel, thanks very much.
Once again, the only thing that rattled Trump was a difficult question from what he calls the dishonest media. It was, with that small exception, the most disciplined and dignified we've seen the president yet. He said little except warm things about Britain and Brexit, gave nothing away when asked about Russia or Mexico. In fact, the only substantial thing he said was that even though he thinks torture works, it won't happen because his defence secretary disagrees with it. It was left to Mrs May to give the detail on their brief meeting. She claimed he said he's 100% behind NATO, talked of a future trade deal with Britain, and said they shared the idea of ordinary working people centre stage. Tonight, what can we make of this first meeting?
Well, they're now having lunch inside with other aides, but they've had the press conference, perhaps the moment of highest risk. Theresa May, having bounded across the Atlantic, didn't want to look like she was a lapdog trying to get first over the threshold. Actually, she seemed like quite a good influence on the president, and he was slightly better house-trained than perhaps the world or America has yet seen him.
Also tonight, reasons to be fearful. Although Theresa May claims she and President Trump remain committed to NATO, the Baltics aren't so sure. We're in Latvia, where generals want to know if the alliance would still come to their aid against Russian aggression.
Do you feel unsafe?
Of course we do.
Yeah.
Of course we do. My people, my country does.
Mr. Trump holds an hour-long call with the Mexican president, calling it friendly. But we'll be speaking to the country's former president, who's certainly not friendly, about paying for Trump's wall. And Tesco snaps up the wholesale giant's Booker in a deal which could change the face of the British high street. The presence of Theresa May seems to have tempered Donald Trump. I'm not so brash, he assured the British media, saying he was a people person. There was praise for Brexit, talk of a fantastic relationship and building on military and trade deals. Standing alongside each other in the White House, both leaders insisted their countries would get along great. There were some uncomfortable moments, notably over torture and links with Russia. But this was one time when Mr. Trump mostly did stick to the script. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, was there, and he's outside the White House now.
Well, Theresa May came here with a few flattering remarks she was ready to deliver, very carefully thought out beforehand. She talked about Donald Trump's stunning election victory. You could probably call it a lot of things, but that might not be everybody's first adjective. Donald Trump looked down, smiled, pleased with himself at his son-in-law in the row in front. This was clearly working well. The challenge for Theresa May was to flatter him, to somehow build a relationship with him, but not to lose her own dignity. Here's how her trip has gone so far. Theresa May's day started with a visit to Arlington Military Cemetery. Yesterday, in a speech to Republican Congress members in Philadelphia, she repeatedly emphasized the joint leadership and sacrifice of the US and UK military. Though Theresa May also told them recent military action in Iraq and Libya had been wrong-headed.
The Honourable Theresa May.
It was a speech in which she laid out her vision of how the world needs international institutions, like NATO, the UN, bodies that President Trump has derided.
Our two countries together have a responsibility to lead.
This audience liked that, but was the president listening? President Trump was posing for the media on Air Force One on his way back from the same gathering. And he was busy threatening a trade war with Mexico.
How was your first flight, sir? Beautiful. Great plane. Really beautiful.
You were very impressed with your phones, too.
Well, I have great phones. I have phones that, let me tell you, the technology that we have in this country is incredible.
Yesterday morning, he invited Fox News into the Oval Office.
Just take a look, and look at my desk. Papers. You don't see presidents with them.
This could be some of the break-the-ice small talk Theresa May's meeting kicked off with.
I moved paintings around the White House. I just thought it would be great. So we have George Washington, Honest Abe Lincoln.
Attention!
Her team's been worrying away at how to play this meeting. The advice was to try to press President Trump's buttons with an offer of a right royal trip to the United Kingdom this summer, to sing his tune where possible, on, for instance, upping other NATO members' contributions, in return for getting a clear public commitment to NATO's central tenet. An attack on one ally is an attack on all.
This is the original, folks. This is the original in many ways. In many ways. And it's a great honor to have Winston Churchill back.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. We're very pleased that you have accepted his back.
UK officials said they'd been taken aback by how the Trump team wanted to move fast on a US-UK trade deal. Mrs May will want to waive that promise as proof that Brexit can be a success. But officials say they're well aware of the risks of ending up dancing to America's tune on product rules, state aid and much else, just as Britain is supposed to be slipping the grip of EU rules. Well, I think what a lot of people are coming away from this press conference at least feeling, even though we haven't been in the room to observe the realities, is that Theresa May has slightly tamed Donald Trump. This has been the most restrained that the man has been since he took office, maybe for many years altogether. When it comes to Russia, for instance, at one point Theresa May said in the press conference that sanctions should continue. Donald Trump nodded. I doubt he agrees with that, but he certainly didn't wade in and differ from it. On torture, the issue that's at the front of a lot of people's mind at the moment, given that he's been very publicly repeating his support for it, he said he'd take the advice of his defense secretary, who's an opponent of America using torture. There was one critical moment when Theresa May made sure that she said what she thinks he's said in private, and she said it in public, which is that Donald Trump is a 100% supporter of NATO. Donald Trump's mouth moved. I think he said sure or true. And she will bank that as something that will reassure people who've only heard Donald Trump say that NATO is obsolete. There was a lot of gush, inevitably, about the special relationship. This was very much an attempt by Theresa May to make sure this isn't a one-off, that she builds a relationship over time. And here's a clip that shows you a little flavour of that.
The special relationship between our two countries has been one of the great forces in history for justice and for peace. And by the way, my mother was born in Scotland, Stornoway, which is serious Scotland. Today, the United States renews our deep bond with Britain, military, financial, cultural, and political. We have one of the great bonds. We pledge our lasting support to this most special relationship.
I'm so pleased that I've been able to be here today, and thank you for inviting me so soon after your inauguration. And I'm delighted to be able to congratulate you on what was a stunning election victory. And as you say, the invitation is an indication of the strength and importance of the special relationship that exists between our two countries, a relationship based on the bonds of history, of family, kinship and common interests. And in a further sign of the importance of that relationship, I have today been able to convey Her Majesty the Queen's hope that President Trump and the First Lady would pay a state visit to the United Kingdom later this year, and I'm delighted that the President has accepted that invitation. On defence and security cooperation, we're united in our recognition of NATO as the bulwark of our collective defence, and today we've reaffirmed our unshakable commitment to this alliance. Mr. President, I think you confirmed that you're 100% behind NATO, but we're also discussing the importance of NATO continuing to ensure it is as equipped to fight terrorism and cyber warfare as it is to fight more conventional forms of war.
It was very telling that the statement that Theresa May gave at the top of this press conference was much longer than the one that Donald Trump gave. She was trying to nail down a lot of commitments, not just that one on NATO, but also on trade. She said that there was going to be a lot of scoping of a US-UK trade deal, and she'll feel that she's made significant progress there as well. There was one particularly awkward question, and you can see the question and Donald Trump's response to it here.
Mr. President, you've said before that torture works. You've praised Russia. You've said you want to ban some Muslims from coming to America. You've suggested there should be punishment for abortion. For many people in Britain, those sound like alarming beliefs. What do you say to our viewers at home who are worried about some of your views and worried about you becoming the leader of the free world?
This was your choice of a question.
There goes that relationship.
On the topics, and there will be times when we disagree and issues on which we disagree, the point of the special relationship is that we are able to have that open and frank discussion.
A great general who has just been appointed Secretary of Defense, General James Mattis, and he has stated publicly that he does not necessarily believe in torture or waterboarding, or however you want to define it. Enhanced interrogation, I guess, would be a word that a lot of people would like to use. I don't necessarily agree, but I would tell you that he will override because I'm giving him that power. He's an expert. He's highly respected. He's the general's general.
Well, they're now going to be discussing, amongst other things, Russia and Syria over lunch. Russia they did touch on in the press conference, but not yet in their formal talks. Naturally, British and some Republican concern here and concern in countries across Europe about the overtures that President Trump has been making to President Putin. He's got a phone call with him tomorrow. Here's how that section of the press conference went.
Putin and Russia, I don't say good, bad, or indifferent. I don't know the gentleman. I hope we have a fantastic relationship. That's possible, and it's also possible that we won't. We will see what happens. I will be representing the American people very, very strongly, very forcefully. And if we have a great relationship with Russia and other countries, and if we go after ISIS together, which has to be stopped, that's an evil that has to be stopped, I will consider that a good thing, not a bad thing.
Well, not so many years ago, in a different relationship between two leaders of the US and the UK, President George W. Bush was asked what he and Tony Blair had in common, and he said, well, we share the same toothpaste. Inevitably, this question always comes up, and at the beginning of this working relationship, here's how the answer went.
We look to have a great relationship with all countries, ideally. That won't necessarily happen. Unfortunately, probably won't happen with many countries, but if we can have, as we do with Prime Minister May and the relationship that we've all developed, and even in the short relationship that we've just developed just by being with each other, we're going to have lunch, and we've really had some very interesting talks and very productive talks. But if we can...
Well, I think Theresa May will leave after that press conference feeling that she's proved the point, that she hasn't just come here as a lapdog, but she's come here to try and improve behaviour, to be a good influence. Now, there'll be plenty of other countries that look at this production and think, actually, Britain has just looked sycophantic and rather desperate. And the proof, of course, will come in the many months to come.
Gary Gibbon. Well, tomorrow, as Gary said, Mr. Trump will be speaking by phone with Angela Merkel and Russia's Vladimir Putin, a man who the leading Republican John McCain branded today a murderer and a thug. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilson, is also in Washington and joins us now. Lindsay, he was very pro-Brexit. How will this appearance go down in Europe's capitals?
Well, I'm not sure if in Berlin and Paris there'll be a sharp intake of breath or just a resigned shrug of the shoulders. I think that Theresa May's, talking of the stunning victory will be seen as flattery. In Germany, they're talking about strategic patience. And while looking at what Donald Trump might do, there's a lot of concern there, particularly because Donald Trump has criticized Angela Merkel for her policy on refugees. He's going to speak to her tomorrow as well. And I think that that is the very important relationship, because although the British are always talking about the special relationship, for many years, it hasn't been that special. The important relationship with Europe and Washington has been with Berlin. And that, I think, is where we're seeing a change, because there is such a support for Brexit from President Trump. That relationship with Germany is likely to become more distant. And also because Angela Merkel is very, very worried about Russia. It's interesting, President Trump always talks about his Scottish mother. I don't know how much he talks about his German grandfather.
Now, she did really nudge him on NATO. So has she represented the views of other allies?
Yeah, to some extent, I think that she did, this thing of NATO being a bulwark, because, Donald Trump said that he didn't sort of go backwards and forwards in his views, but actually, he does, because several times he said NATO's obsolete because it doesn't fight terror, even though NATO countries have been in Afghanistan fighting alongside the Americans, and, and then he goes backwards and forwards. So the question is whether Theresa May has really nailed him down on that, and certainly that is something that other European countries are going to be very concerned about. But the other thing, because the question really is, how much is Donald Trump's word worth? We really don't know that yet, and Theresa May doesn't know that yet.
If you step back, Theresa May was presenting herself really as an equal. That this is the days of Britain and America leading the world once more. I mean, is this the real world?
Yes. No, that's the fantasy world, and that's the world of the bust of Churchill there in the Oval Office. It's a world which both Theresa May and Donald Trump like to imagine can exist again. But the fact of the matter is that the European Union is a market of 500 million people, and the US is 300 million people, and Britain, I think, is 60 million people. This is a different world. It's not the world that Donald Trump and Theresa May would like to exist.
Lindsay Hilson, thank you. Well, joining me now are the former International Development Secretary Andrew Mitchell. From Washington, Diana Furchtgott-Roth, who was part of Donald Trump's transition team. And here in the studio, the Shadow Home Secretary, Diane Abbott. Diane Abbott, what do you make of this appearance today?
Well, the last time I saw a British Prime Minister so dazzled by the imperial presidency, it was Tony Blair and George W. Bush, and that did not end well.
You say dazzled, but I mean, she seemed to be the one in charge.
Well,
she was the one giving all the detail.
Well, she said he's very, very pro-NATO. He didn't say so himself. We must necessarily be in a weaker position with the US when we're no longer part of the whole EU. And I do think it's possible to be a little bit self-congratulatory about that special relationship. In the end, relationships are about pounds, shillings and pence, and we're a much smaller market than the EU.
Andrew Mitchell, the thing we can be of no doubt about is Britain and America hitched together, whether you want to call it shoulder to shoulder or whatever. That was very clear today from that press conference. Is this a risk?
No, I thought the body language was respectful, and that it looks like an extremely good start to what is a vital relationship for Britain. And, of course, on the issue of NATO, which was clearly pretty central to their discussions, it does appear that there is complete agreement, because we also believe that other European nations should step up and spend the 2% that was previously agreed and which is essential for our mutual defence.
But
And
he
so there
didn't
was
say
agreement
it.
on that. There seemed to be agreement on a great deal, and I think that the relationship has started extremely well. It looks, to all intents and purposes, as a great deal closer than the relationship with President Obama. And I think Mrs. May is going to have a lot of influence with the president, and that's a very good thing.
But he didn't mention NATO. And the thing we know about Trump is he really knows about words and what he means to say and what he doesn't mean to say. And the fact that it didn't come out of his mouth means he's not committed to anything.
Well, I think they did discuss NATO, because it was clear from the press conference that there had been agreement between them. But I think on a whole series of other matters there was clearly agreement as well, and he appears to be listening, for example, on the issue of torture to the generals and the people around him, and to have changed his mind. So I think all of that, together with, as I say, what appears to be, you know, a very good relationship developing between them, that is all very encouraging.
Diana Furchtgott-Roth, what did you make of this? I mean, looking at it from here, it seemed as though we were seeing Donald Trump in a way we've never seen him before. So disciplined, not going on, not attacking people, and sort of sticking to the script. Do you think she had a good influence over him?
Well, that's the way people on the campaign and on the transition team see him. And in meetings, he's very calm, he's very disciplined, he listens carefully, he responds quickly and makes very fast decisions. So what you're seeing is the Donald Trump that many of us have been seeing over the past 6 months.
But that's not a Donald Trump the rest of the world has seen. I mean, we'll take your word that that's what he's like behind closed doors. But I mean, this was a new Donald Trump on the world stage.
Yes, but it's not an unreal Donald Trump. That's all I'm trying to say. It is perhaps a different Donald Trump than people in public have seen, but this is how he behaves to his associates, to people who come to meet him, to people who come to visit him.
Diane Abbott, the point is he didn't take anything back. You know, we saw that question to him, asking him about abortion, about torture, about, you know, all sorts of things many people find alarming, and he said he sticks by it all.
Take it back. But come on, this is the man who believes in grabbing women by the pussy. This is the man that believes that torture works. This is a man that believes that you have to ban many Muslim people from the UK.
And he's doing that today, in fact.
Indeed, and so of course we have to talk to him. Anybody that was in power in Britain would have to work with him. But we must not lose sense of our own values as a country. And I think there's only one Donald Trump. The Donald Trump on the campaign trail is a Donald Trump that's going to be president going forward. And I think this idea that Theresa May is influencing him in any serious way, it will all end badly.
But when you say we must hold on to our values, I mean, how do you do that? You say we must talk to him, of course, but we must hold on to our values. So what does that mean? Do you think Theresa May should have stood up today and said, yes, he's wrong about all of that?
No.
I find his views towards women abhorrent?
We must never give the impression that we are colluding with his visceral anti-immigrant values or colluding with him on issues of torture. And we mustn't delude ourselves to have more influence over him than we can possibly have.
Andrew Mitchell, I mean, how do you get this balance right? You know, of not criticising anything and just saying, well, where we disagree, we'll say so, but then not actually saying so.
Well, it does look as though she has got that balance absolutely right. She's been very clear. She was very clear on torture. She was very clear about some of the wholly unacceptable things the president has said in the past about women, and for which he has apologised. So I don't think she has in any way been pulling her punches, but equally today I thought there was the start of an extremely constructive and good relationship, which is hugely in Britain's interest and in America's interest as well. And I think tonight we should say that this has started very well, and we wish it well for the future.
But I mean, well, she didn't say anything when asked, for example, about building a wall along that border with Mexico and shutting people out. I mean, she didn't say anything about the executive order he's signing today, banning Syrian refugees from the United States. I mean, is Britain supposed to just sort of swallow all that as part of the relationship?
Well, on the Mexican issue, I think, as the President said in the press conference, and I think was accepted in the press conference, that wasn't really a matter for the British Prime Minister. And on Syria, the most important thing that we can do is to try and encourage the American President and President Putin to work together to stop the appalling violence that has convulsed a generation, not only in Syria, but in the surrounding countries. And I've no doubt at all that that will have been one of the things that the British Prime Minister was urging him to do.
Do you see the Trumpification of British foreign policy already? I mean, Britain seems to be moving closer to the United States when it comes to Syria, for example. Now talking about the possibility of Assad staying in power longer and sort of taking back the demand for him to go immediately.
Well, there's a pretty healthy debate in Britain. Many of us argued early on that Assad is a key part of the problem and therefore is also a part of the solution. And focusing exclusively on a post-Assad Syria in trying to get these negotiations going is not likely to be enormously constructive. We've got to try and have a bottom-up negotiation there. And that's why I say the important thing is to try and ensure that President Trump and President Putin, if they are able to work together for the defeat of ISIL and for bringing Syria back together again and tackling this appalling, awful conflict that has destroyed the lives of so many millions of people, then that's something Britain can usefully do to help bring that about.
Diana Furstcott-Roth, why does Trump care about Britain? I mean, the last British Prime Minister, David Cameron, said, look, we've got to be honest about these things. We're the junior partner. We don't have anything like the clout that we used to have. In this modern world of China, Russia, India, great emerging economies and powers, why does he think Britain matters?
Well, first of all, he's very attached to Britain. He's very fond of going to Scotland. He loves Britain. Secondly, trade is something that both countries have to gain. Here, President Trump is saying that he wants to renegotiate NAFTA, but he also wants to put Britain at the top of the queue for a trade deal. And I think that he has to gain for that. And also Theresa May, she will gain from that also, because the EU is in shambles in terms of growth rates. It's not just Britain who wants to leave, other countries want to leave also. It has a 1% growth rate. It has terrible demographic problems. It has the problems with massive refugees coming in. And it's a little bit hard for Mrs. Abbott to criticize President Trump on the wall when Britain has a nice channel surrounding it and plenty of policemen at Calais to keep immigrants out.
Diana Furstcott-Roth, Andrew Mitchell, and Diane Abbott, thank you all very much indeed. Now, all this week, we've been reporting on the wider issues in this new Trump world. The president has previously described NATO as obsolete and talked of closer ties with the Kremlin. Although today, Theresa May insisted both countries had reaffirmed their commitment to the alliance, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania are urgently planning to reinforce their borders with Russia, worried they could lose the protection enshrined in NATO's Article 5, committing the alliance to defend its members if they come under attack. Porrick O'Brien is in the Latvian capital, Riga.
Well, Krish, Donald Trump's newfound enthusiasm for NATO will go down very well with the military men, with the ministers that we've been talking to in Latvia. But crucially, it'll also go down well with ordinary Latvians. We've been travelling the length and breadth of this country over the last 3 or 4 days. And what is really striking is how the annexation of Crimea sent a shiver down the spine of ordinary Latvians. Their relationship to NATO and Article 5 is quite a personal one. They don't think about it in terms of, some sort of life insurance policy you once took out and have forgotten about. Their feeling, their perception of Article 5, they see it as a direct line to the fire brigade if the neighbours are considered pyromaniacs. Feeling the chill of Russia breathing down your neck. President Trump in the White House and questions over Article 5. For Latvia, more than most, the New World Order is a wake-up call. US troops drilled by Latvians join NATO's deployment along Russia's border. By the end of the year, President Trump permitting, over 4,000 NATO soldiers will be permanently stationed in the Baltic states and Poland. Russian aggression in the Ukraine, another neighbour, sent shivers down the Latvian spine. The country's most senior military man.
We feel unsafe because of that, because of unpredictability.
Do you feel unsafe?
Of course we do.
Yeah.
Of course we do. My people, my country does. But at this moment I wouldn't say straight, let's stop with risks. With risks, very higher risks.
This chief of defence, like so many in Latvia, is also talking from a painful, personal place.
The barricades set up to prevent an assault by the Soviet army stayed in place around the city's centre.
The defence chief was here with thousands of others last time round in '91. Ordinary Latvians saw off Soviet forces. 7 people died. This kind of history for these kind of people makes NATO feel anything but obsolete. When you hear Donald Trump talking about an obsolete NATO, how does that make you feel?
No, first of all, I'm not going to comment President Trump. I'm a uniformed man. But all I can say, I think his comments about defense expenditure and nations' responsibility to spend more for their own defense, I think it's very right.
Latvia has plans to hit the 2% of GDP on defence mark next year. But President Trump's benefit of the doubt language on Russia doesn't wash here. In Latvia, it's just another reason to be fearful. To really understand, though, how ordinary Latvians feel about the perceived Russian threat, you have to leave the war games on the frozen lake. You have to go to the capital, Riga, get a flat white in a hipster cafe. Martin Stakis runs one of the places to be seen for Riga's new trendy brigade. Not the only brigade this young man is a member of. He's the poster boy for the Latvian Home Guard. Dad's army, it ain't. The country has been investing heavily in the units, and last year a new law enabled them to respond to potential Russian aggression without the green light from above. After Russia invaded the Ukraine, young people like him started signing up in droves. The tipping point for you was Crimea.
Sure, yeah, because we could be on the list. We have really the same conditions. While many Russians are living here, some of them are not loyal. So I think this scenario, it could be.
The crucial difference, of course, the Ukraine is not a NATO member. Latvia is. So if there was aggression on the borders, it could trigger regional conflict. And you know that's a real worry on the streets when your hipsters swap skinny jeans for fatigues.
All of us in my squad are the same.
Is that right?
Yeah. They all have good jobs and they have something to lose.
About a third of the Latvian population are ethnic Russians, a source of both cultural richness but tension too. Interference from Moscow is nothing new here. And this week, in the town of Jelgava, extraordinary goings-on in court. What's happening behind this courtroom door in closed session is a first in Latvian history. A man in his 50s who's a railway worker is, it is alleged, a Russian spy. The accused Latvian man fought in Afghanistan with the Soviets in the 80s. It's alleged he sent pictures to friends in Russia of NATO military equipment in transit. This sort of case, combined with uncertainty around NATO, adds to a sense of feverish unpredictability.
I'm not paid for being nervous or concerned.
He's paid to be Latvia's foreign minister. Warm relations between US and Russia, something to welcome, as long as deal-making, he says, doesn't trump delicate diplomacy.
If such a deal is made at the expense of the third countries, if we return to the spheres of influence, if we, let's say, neglect key international law principles, then we are heading to disaster.
Down south in Daugavpils, close to the border, a long way from the well-to-do Riga. The town's majority ethnically Russian, and identity politics plays big here, and difficult questions about where loyalties lie. If the Russian tanks rolled in, what would you do?
Я не буду, стрелять в солдат латвийской армии никогда. Б, я никогда не буду стрелять в солдат российской армии.
So you'll just sit on the fence?
У нас все так будут делать. Если вы со своим НАТО отсюда уйдете, понимаете, тогда у нас ракеты на нас не будут направлены. Они будут на вас направлены.
Across town in a frozen field. Mixed ethnicities give up weekends for home guard exercise. Too cold to chat NATO or Article 5 or President Trump. Just a hope that the imaginary mortar rounds stay that way.
Can't pay, won't pay, who'll pay, we'll all pay. The question of Donald Trump's Mexican border wall, all 1,900 miles of it, has very few answers. First thing this morning, President Trump was railing at Mexico on Twitter, saying it had taken advantage of the US for too long. Although later he held an hour-long phone call with the Mexican leader over the issue. But it's Mexico's former president, Vicente Fox, who's been really outspoken.
We will build a great wall along the southern border. And Mexico will pay for the wall.
It was one of his key election promises, but 2,000-mile-long walls don't come cheap. This one, around $12 billion.
They don't know it yet, but they're going to pay for the wall.
Many across the border were less keen.
Mexico is strong.
Including the former Mexican president, Vicente Fox, who's repeatedly taken to Twitter himself to make his feelings clear. A planned bilateral was then cancelled, and as Mr. Trump got used to his new means of transport, his team suggested a 20% tax on goods from Mexico to cover the cost. In an effort to ease the tension, Mexico's president, Enrique Peña Nieto, and Trump spoke at length today.
We had a talk that lasted for about an hour this morning, and we are going to be working on a fair relationship and a new relationship.
But rebuilding trust may prove more difficult than bricks and mortar. And Vicente Fox joins us now via the internet from Mexico. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Mr. Fox, you're live on Channel 4. Please do not swear. But what do you make of President Trump's insistence that one way or another Mexico will pay?
Okay, I have some comments. Number one, as he stated, and you put it right now on the screen, that Mexico has taken advantage of the United States for a long time, and it is time to stop. Well, he better know that China has taken much more advantage than Mexico, than Japan has done so, than Germany has done so, than Britain has done so. United States has a deficit with every single economy in the world. That's the way U.S. economy works. Why he concentrates on Mexico, who knows? We don't like him because we're dark, because we're not blonde like him. Who knows? But anyway, he is proposing one idea after another one, very crazy ideas. He's acting like a CEO, not like a president. I think he needs to grow up. He needs to understand that he is president today of the most important nation in the world. He has to change. Now, fortunately, President Peña has stopped him, stood in front of him and told him, Mexico is not paying for the wall. Do whatever you want. It's your right to build the wall, but you are going to pay for it. And this latest crazy idea of taxing Mexican imports, that's a declaration of war in trade terms. And this could happen to everybody in the world because he has spoken about America first, American first. Now I tell him Mexico first, and we're ready to confront whatever situation you come up with.
But isn't it also President Peña's fault, in part, that Donald Trump is in the White House? He received him, he enabled him to look presidential before the election, And it led, so claims Donald Trump, to many Latino voters in the United States voting Republican.
That was a historical mistake. Every single Mexican claimed and denounced our president that he had made that historic mistake. And yes, it's possible that that was one of the main reasons why Trump got the presidency of the United States. But that mistake now has changed. He learned, Peña Nieto learned the lesson, and today he is in a very different mood because we Mexicans have forced President Peña Nieto to have a very strong stand. And the inspiration comes from time ago where our president, Lázaro Cárdenas, which I'm not a fan of him, nationalized the oil industry because of the abuses of oil corporations, international oil corporations. They were nationalized. Mexico took over the assets. I'm not proposing that to happen to the automobile companies or companies that are operating in Mexico. We have an excellent relationship. We work with them very closely. They know that they need Mexico to be competitive. Otherwise, they will never have the capacity to manufacture.
Well, what would you say? Let me just interrupt you briefly.
European cars.
Just because we've just got a little bit of time left at the end now. If Donald Trump rang you now and said, let's sort this out, what would you say to him?
Donald, I will respect you the moment you start respecting everybody else, because he doesn't respect people, nobody respects him. To me, I will not even call him president up until he apologized to Mexico and Mexicans, and number two, that he treats people with respect. And by the way, this morning he had a conference call with
I'm very sorry that we've lost the internet signal there, but I think we got the gist of what Vicente Fox was saying. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's go back to our political editor Gary Gibbon outside the White House. What have we really learned today? Oh, it's gone to black. Well, that's the worst luck. Let's have a listen again to what they said today in the press conference.
The hard-working daughter of a vicar, the brash TV extrovert. Have you found anything in common personally yet?
Actually, I'm not as brash as you might think. and I can tell you that I think we're going to get along very well. You know, it's interesting because I am a people person. I think you are also, Teresa. And I can often tell how I get along with somebody very early, and I believe we're going to have a fantastic relationship.
But I think this one coming up was really the question of the press conference. I say press conference in inverted commas, really. These events have 4 questions in them, so you have to pack an awful lot into one. And this was the moment where a British reporter put a lot of British fears to the president about what he's been saying for the last few months.
Mr. President, you've said before that torture works. You've praised Russia. You've said you want to ban some Muslims from coming to America. You've suggested there should be punishment for abortion. For many people in Britain, those sound like alarming beliefs. What do you say to our viewers at home who are worried about some of your views and worried about you becoming the leader of the free world?
This was your choice of a question. There goes.
And that was really the only moment he was very discomforted. Other than that, it was a remarkably disciplined Trump.